just to create something which is fresh, which is new. It's a vision of a music written in quite a different way.
Totalitarianism, total control, and chaos, destruction, and anarchy. Individuals reduced to numbers, to be harnessed to an absolute authority or to be obliterated in the camps and the ovens. All this is horribly bound up with the history of Poland, perhaps more than any other single country. And to me, it's almost miraculous that a Polish artist, like the composer Witold Lutoslawski, who was born in 1913 and who has lived through all this, should have found anything to sing about, anything to celebrate. And yet, in his double concerto for oboe, harp and chamber orchestra, which is the subject of this program, Lutoslawski reveals, between the extremes of total control and disorder, a world of richness, diversity, and grace, in which each individual exercises the freedom to become himself. When this double concerto was first performed here in England in 1980, the critics noticed obvious references to the Baroque concerto grosso, like the Brandenburgs of Bach or the concertos of Handel, in which a small group of soloists alternates, combines, and contrasts with a larger body of strings. So, in Lutoslawski's concerto, oboe and harp soloists and an ensemble of strings and percussion. And perhaps not surprisingly, therefore, it was found to be elegant, refined, and civilized. They were all words used. But then there's a twist, because such qualities were said to make it limited and superficial. Well, this is the world of the Concerto Grosso, the painted hall at Greenwich, unaltered since that time. Look at all this confidence, imagination, control, authority, order. A great monument of civilization, a monument to civilization, such absolute certainty, such permanence, everything in its place. Warsaw in 1939, a seemingly indestructible world, quite as old and civilized as Greenwich, and for Witold Lutoslawski in his 20s, his own specific free world. In this secure world of rich musical culture, the young pianist was able to develop into the young composer. In 1939, the Nazis set about their deliberate destruction of the very roots of Polish national life and devastated the world of the young Lutoslawski. After World War II, the centre of Warsaw was physically reconstructed, exactly as it had been. But physical reconstruction will not put the clock back. Poland had lost a sixth of her population, a third of her intelligentsia had been exterminated, and Lutoslawski himself had lost members of his own family. The world and civilization are not constants. They can't be taken for granted. They offer no guarantees. They will and do change. We see our world in a state of flux, and an artist of Lutoslawski's background recognizes the continual change in the world around him, and also within himself, and makes that the element of civilization that can be celebrated. And such a celebration of change constitutes a civilized and civilizing act. Lutoslawski describes his role as a creative artist as one which tries to give, and these are his words, the most faithful description of an ever-changing world that exists within me. Well, how do you express in music that kind of inner life? Not one that's fixed and firm and resolved and under control, but one that's spontaneous and unpredictable, random, burning, something in excess of what you know it to be, something despite itself. And that's not so easy for Lutoslawski. He's a fastidious man. His temperament inclines to the neat and tidy, the orderly. He thinks he's often over-orderly. He has to find some way to let go. And in the double concerto, it's that drama of release which is played out. That's the opening of the double concerto. 12 strings, each playing a different music as if alone, and the conductor apparently giving up all control. Chaos, and if not chaos, what is it? And how out of control is it? The pleasure of music making, at pleasure, in Latin ad libitum.
I wanted to restore the pleasure of music making, which was neglected by composers of the 50s. They wrote very difficult, rhythmically very difficult parts that occupied the attention of a player entirely. So there was no pleasure of music making. There was just an effort to rightly decipher what was written. So in order to get rid of it, I applied the chance operations that give a performer of an ensemble the possibility of displaying his abilities, his talents, his initiative, his more free playing.
Since about 1960, Lutoslawski has incorporated into his scores what he calls chance operations or ad libitum elements. Where he marks a section ad lib, he's not asking the performer to improvise, to make up the music as he goes along. The performer doesn't control the chance events. On the contrary, The composer writes every note each instrumentalist is to play, then the conductor makes an invitation for the music to begin, but withdraws all coordinating control. Each performs his part as if playing alone. In effect, Lutoslawski places each performer in a separate box. Each box is a separate region of activity within which the performer is allowed a measure of independence, individuality and freedom. But at the same time, he remains part of a group, a confederacy of individuals united by the composer's detailed notation of the music which each is to play. So why did Lutoslawski decide to do this?
The chance operations in pieces like this, and in all my pieces, are not to create many versions of the same piece. No. It's to add something to my repertoire of means of expression. First of all, the rhythm is incredibly rich and sophisticated as a sum of ad libitum played parts. So you can't achieve it in any other way.
What he's doing is to create a new kind of unconventional order. The apparent disorder within the boxes generates a new and rich complexity of rhythms and sound patterns, a continuum of change, a flux, and in the process, something unforeseen is released, something in excess, something outside the control even of the composer. It's a way of allowing each player to express something of his own uniqueness. The start of the double concerto represents a kind of negative freedom, the right of the individual to be left alone. Although it's a concerto, no instrument in this piece ever plays alone, only as if alone. Everything is always in relation to something else. In those opening bars, the 12 strings in 5 short ad-lib sections interrupted by silencers are actually playing collectively all 12 notes of the chromatic scale in a pre-planned chord. And for the Western composer, those 12 notes constitute the whole world. Certainly there's a sense of chaos. The players are uncoordinated, the gestures don't seem to be getting us anywhere, and the continual interruption of the flow compounds the sense of lack of cohesion and serves to heighten the tension. Enter the oboe and harp, each in his box, each as if alone, and, like the strings, not conducted. They rhapsodize. The soloists have also been exploring those 12 notes of the chromatic scale. The oboe 5, the harp, the remaining 7. And as they're also playing ad lib, they make no effort to come together. So again, the whole world is there, but only if the two parts are added together. Up to this point, we've heard alternations and deployments of the various regions of activity. Now comes a sudden call to order from the percussion and the first conducted section of the piece. It introduces the first tentative and uneasy attempt at interaction between the soloists and the ensemble, all now out of their boxes. There's also an attempt to share all 12 notes, but the two soloists seem incapable of coming together, and they simply dog each other's footsteps until the oboist, using a technique of overblowing, produces coarse and vulgar sounds that suggest the frustration he feels that he and his partner can't get it together. A second violent gesture from the percussion, which is fuller and more deliberate this time, breaks the deadlock and throws everybody back into their boxes with the tension as high as ever and nothing resolved. Though everything in this movement is fluidly organized, all the parts are out of sync. When the conductor attempts to synchronize, the result is unsatisfactory. Apparently, here is no viable world. Lutoslawski says that the titles of the movements are not to be taken too seriously, but dolente at the start of the second movement does suggest sorrow or regret, perhaps for the situation in the first movement. But the emotional climate is different. The temperature's cooled. The strings open pizzicato, very fragile and tenuous. The soloists also emerge tentatively from their boxes. this point, something completely new and completely unforeseen happens. Two new instruments, which we haven't heard before, the vibraphone and marimba, give us the possibility of other musics, seemly, poetic and beautiful, a glimpse of another world, or the world reformulated. The soloists respond to this as if it has given them pause for thought, nervous as if uncertain how to react, and becoming increasingly agitated. Then another unforeseen event occurs with the first and only appearance of the timpani. It produces a manic reaction from the soloists. However, the strings, with the soloists together for the first time in this movement, begin to play chords. They trickle away like sand through the fingers. The finale is marked Marciale e Grottesco. Originally, apparently, Lutoslawski was going to end the piece with a funeral march in which all the tensions of the preceding movements will be left unresolved. Everything, music and players, will be left unreconciled. In the event, he changed his mind, but the last movement remains a march. And march for Lutoslawski has many bad connotations. The war, the Nazi occupation, and his own long march of 700 kilometers back to Warsaw at the beginning of the war, and all the while thinking that his manuscripts had been destroyed. The movement opens with a kind of martial law, everybody forced to order. All 12 notes are there, the conductor is actively engaged, and the soloists, freed from their boxes, try in turn to get with the rest of the world of the orchestra. Now, the oboe, producing again those funny noises, makes grotesque gestures as if to say, well, this is ridiculous. We're supposed to be together, yet we're playing separately. But there's a brief suggestion on strings and glockenspiel of an all-harmonious world, a rejection of the stupid martial terms of the movement's progress. The harp is alert to it, but the oboe is preoccupied with its screams of frustration, and his fury throws both soloists back into their boxes, though significantly this time 6 notes each. The strings hesitantly reconstitute the 12-note world, and together, for the first time, the oboe and harp are provoked into joining them. An all-harmonious world begins to burgeon. The glockenspiel is all jubilation as the piece proceeds to its optimistic and civilized end. Lutoslawski's artistic method, as we've seen, is an attempt to free himself, to let go, but in such a way that something other than chaos and destruction is released. In the process of continual change and flux, the participants in this drama move from being each as if alone, through a struggle for mutual support and reinforcement, towards solidarity. Superficial, remember, that's what the critics said. I've a different impression, and it's the feeling I have about all Lutoslawski's work. For me, the most abiding impression of this music is of precariousness, of the precariousness of life, not just of individual lives, but of society itself, of all the mechanisms by which we recognize each other, of civilization.